Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here with Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the home, the place, the platform to help you find your best, most true, authentic business voice. Heck, maybe your best authentic voice. Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results, meet the person of your dreams, make billions of dollars. All right, we're not quite guaranteeing the last two, although I feel like we got an outside shot today. Why? We've got a damn good guest that I get to meet for the first time, and another proud member of the Podmatch team, which I love, which is how we connected in the first place. Charles Sims, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and to chat with you for the next little bit.
I'm excited as well, too. So, folks, I love this in terms of the bio. Charles being a seasoned tech evangelist, investor, former CTO, 15 years of experience navigating the landscapes. I'm sorry, we'll say it even more ominously, the intricate landscapes of technology. There's some fun numbers that we get to throw around. We billions with a B, several high stakes deals. If you're a basketball fan, we'll throw a little bit of that around. If you're an entertainment fan, we'll throw a little bit of that around. But what I really am excited about is this. I'm a guy who I use technology because you have to. I don't know that I exactly fully embrace technology, but it is here and I welcome it. And one of the cool things that I get to do today is work with somebody who makes technology a little less intimidating. And Charles, what was the term you were saying to me, which I kind of fell in love with when you just said it?
Empathetic innovation, the idea of making sure that you're taking people along for the ride rather than forcing them and shoving them across the frontier.
So the shoving them across, I can relate. So you're going to help ease my mind today, which is good news. Mm-hmm. I'm like a lot of people, and from the entrepreneur space, I want to save time. I want to be more efficient. I want to keep up. And I wanna, but then it's also the inherent fear that I'm going to lean back to my former career of broadcast advertising sales, where we had IT people, and our rendition of that was to either bang our computers in a huff because they weren't scurrying to come fix whatever made up crisis I had for a sales presentation. Charles, I don't ever recall an IT person with a bad disposition. How is it that every single person always had a really patient personality? Were you always drawn to what I'm going to say the outside fringe of tech?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. I think what you're kind of alluding to with the typical IT person who you're dealing with,
right.
You're frustrated, something's not working. You understand why it's not working. It doesn't seem logical to you as the user, and you're almost embarrassed. Why isn't it working? And I know everything else in this world, but this is the one thing that I just don't get it. So for an IT person to come to you immediately and say, "You idiot, why didn't this is so easy, a dog could do," all those typical phrases that we usually would get back from the end user. The better way is to just understand empathetically they're going through something. They're not mad at you. They just need help to get it. And if you approach them in a more concierge, a more meaningful way, they're less likely to stay in that huff and puff and actually get something done. Remember how it was gotten done. And you also had seen this transition. IT in the past came from your typical operations folks. So whether it was it felt a lot more like electricians or a lot more like plumbers, where they're just keeping the lights on. They weren't really being innovative and forward thinking. And in the past 15 to 20 years, you really have seen that shift from these are people who are just kind of keeping the lights on for the entire business to being able to add and drive innovation within the business. And that dichotomy between IT and technology has also shifted how entrepreneurs and a lot of your executives see the potential. And I think that's even in those really far thinking about the future and all that, you still have to hone back to that empathy. how do we do this? How do we talk to an executive and get them excited about something, but not do it in a way that we're completely glossing their eyes over? They have no idea. We're talking tech, 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 tech. It
Mm-hmm.
is that nice blend between the two that the best tend to have.
You were traveling some pretty high, not were, are, but there's some amazing stories that you have. What got you into the field? Because obviously you're not starting in with the NBA in
Mhm.
terms of it. Like what got you to ascend to that point? What were the
Yeah.
skill sets? What were the experiences? And mainly, what was the mindset that you had that was able to elevate you to these levels, which we will gladly cover?
Yeah. So the one of the best first pieces or first careers I had was in management consulting within technology. So it was working with 10, 20 different industries, 60 different companies over the course of 5, 6, 7 years, and really interacting with your CEOs, your CFOs, your CTOs, your CIOs,
Right.
your all across the business. And what that really gave me was this massive breadth of understanding of
Mm-hmm.
this is how businesses work. This is how the executives want to be spoken to. And
Mm.
this is how historically they have been spoken that doesn't work. There's a reason we're
Mm.
coming in. It's because something has failed. They
Mm-hmm.
need they need some level of injection, whether it is vision or injection to get projects done and finish
Mm-hmm.
things up so the business can keep going. But none of these businesses were historically technology businesses. So they weren't dev shops. They weren't startups. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
like technical startups or SaaS or anything. They were telescope manufacturers. They were legal teams and law firms. They were medical centers. And so you have this really interesting space where you're both trying to figure out how the technical works within their specialty, but also how to do it in a way that it makes sense to them and you're lining them up with those business terms. And so after about 10 years in that space, I was pulled into a specific project with the LA Clippers. The CFO fell in love with me and bought out my contract and brought me on. And that was the first time I had been internal in this space and realized
Mm-hmm.
how fun, but how limiting it could be if you don't
Mm-hmm.
look at it the right way. You need to push the innovation. You need to be like almost a salesperson internally to continue to get those going. And so the first year was almost IT, fixing the
Mm-hmm.
servers, getting
Mm-hmm.
stuff going, doing a migration here and there. Then as we shifted into now we were developing the innovative virtual playoffs when it was pandemic time and they're going to
Right.
Florida. Like all of those new things, we developed Clippers Vision, which is AR VR augmented reality for Steve Ballmer's pet toy to watch and be able to stream it on your phone. And so a lot of those projects came from getting the base work done, getting the foundation, getting the trust in all of the different departments, and then leaning into that innovative side of, oh, he has an idea. He can be creative. His team can be the solution experts internally that we need.
So I it's funny. I came from broadcast television ad sales,
Mhm.
digital ad sales, and I love the way that you described like that sense of being the one fixing things that were broken. I honest to God, I can't think, and I was trying over these couple of minutes in my mind to think of a single instance where I ever made a proactive call to somebody in IT. And the answer was never.
Mhm.
Never, zero. So
Mhm.
you're a part of that space. And then, as you said, you're brought into the internal singular opportunity with an NBA franchise and working with somebody who remains a very, very innovative person. So,
Mhm.
what was it like? I mean, heck, it's like they just launched the Intuit Dome and
Into
it
it,
like,
yeah.
right? And it's like, so always that franchise to me, and I don't know the franchise well, other than I'm an NBA fan, and that the Clippers have needed to be more on the cutting edge in the sense that they were always competing with what was always looked at as, oh, the real LA team or
Mhm.
whatever. So I love the idea that a lot of risks were taken. You get brought into the organization, and as I said, you started in much more of a singular role. What were some of the reasons you think that you were able to ascend? What were some of the creative, you alluded to some of the creative things. What were some of the things that you were able to demonstrate where they're like, oh, we need to give this guy more space?
I would say initially, as boring as it may sound, I became one of the stars within the budgeting process. And so I
Oh.
had the most experiences with CFOs in my past. I knew how to tear apart a budget. And we had a lot of new executives that were coming in that it might have been their first multi-million-dollar budget, or it might have been the first time they had to present a budget to a very,
Right.
very hard president who really wants to make sure everything is lined up, and then to Steve himself. And so what I ended up being was the one who had fixed so much of the problems that were day to day, whether it was networking issues, and we had to redo the virtual telephones from the old Skype to business, bringing them over to
Oh my God.
a more steady PBX, or the servers that we had no idea what anything was, and consolidating those problems that were day to day problems, that
Right.
Wi-Fi going down every day, to not even trying to remember when Wi-Fi ever went down. And as budget came around, I was the first one, and then became the one who would help out marketing, help out ticketing, help out these other spaces, because I had so many years in that's what I did all day, every day, as the outside person talking to CFO and helping them break those pieces apart and how to relate it to the other business departments themselves. And so that was one of the first, I think I gained a lot of internal traction and favorability with these folks who would normally be dumping on the technical team because nothing ever worked, or they couldn't make sales happen. And so as soon as the everyday problems started going away and we could be more strategic, I got pulled into those. And as I got pulled into those budgets, now those future and innovative projects, I could be like, well, what about this? Or playing a little bit of yes and, oh, that sounds great. And if we could do this, and technology could help you do X, Y, and Z. And so like blending those was how I got pulled into that space.
Without dumping any proprietary information, there's no need for you to do that. But
Yeah.
do you remember, can you think of an as you got pulled into that space, as you were saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of an example of something that you contributed to that you felt really good about? Like where you were early on in the sense of yes and, as you called it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give an example of something that made you feel good where an idea stuck?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I started to fall in love with, I never thought I would before, is the
Huh.
broadcast technology. So the broadcast within in arena broadcasts of
Mhm.
like what we were sending out to the RSNs, partnering with Fox
Right.
Sports at the
Yep.
time. To there's so many of these feeds that were in the arena and would go through this server room called the HSAN, which is basically the NBA's room in every single arena. That all the interior feeds, all the home away, the kiss cam, the slash cam, the on court,
Oh,
all of those going into this one
this is
space,
all going. Okay.
all going to one
Mhm.
space so that NBA can grab whatever they want for their
Yep.
content
Yep.
and whatnot. But one of the first one of the first projects where I really got excited about was being able to then put a secondary encoding server in that server room and pull whatever we want for our executives in arena. So if they wanted, you would never have like OTT access on your phone to the Kiss Cam or to the Jumbotron or what's going on like in the outside of the arena, like all these
Mhm.
specialties, because every OTT was always reliant on the RSN. The RSN would
Mhm.
send a feedback. And
Yep.
by being able to learn about that space,
Mhm.
getting really close with the NBA broadcast folks, I gave something to our executives when they're going on a tour, or when they're just when they're talking with their the suites or whatever. Like they have this really special proprietary, they can show off like what's going on in the building, and we were able to then translate to, now we could actually take those channels, put them in our clubs, and now they like, you start to have this fan experience off of very basic technology, but
Right.
it's just routing a signal that no one else really knew was even there, and was a prelude to what ended up being what we could do for the virtual broadcast for the
Mhm.
pandemic playoffs. We
Mhm.
built an entire mini studio that we pulled those feeds in, that when we're broadcasting and we have the 50 fans that are watching in teams,
Right.
now we can share their individual reactions back into the stadium, and those are going up on the big screens in the stadium. So like that was, I would say, that one little project that I really loved led into something that was like 5 or 6 years, and even led into the vision that I had for the broadcast technology at the new Intuit Dome. So it was a
So
nice blend.
that's a great conclusion. Did you ever get brushback for those sorts of things? How were you able to? I mean, because I ask not just because you got a lot of chefs in the
Oh,
kitchen that
absolutely.
all, not just that, but because in one of the recurring things that I think about, technology can be intimidating. And so
Absolutely.
that fake bravado of I got to push back, even though I have no idea what I'm pushing back on. How did you handle that sort of being in with a lot of egos and
Absolutely.
saying,
I
how did
mean,
you
and
make it work?
it's, yeah, it's something I would say I learned to do a lot better towards the end. And I'm very thankful of my time at the Clippers
Yeah.
to do this, but it's learning what piece of a project you actually pitch. It's not trying to convince them on the entire thing that you might be
Hmm.
working on. It
Hmm.
might be one specific piece, or it might be a different pitch to different departments. So the
Okay.
for that broadcast, the marketing team, I might just be pitching, hey, we have an idea to be able to bring feeds to your digital team that they can use for cut ups
Hmm.
afterwards. But that's it. It's not the entire thing that or when I'm talking to ticketing and I'm saying, hey, we could
Hmm.
give you some personal feeds for when you're presenting to
Hmm.
suites, but that's it. And then playing a lot of so many technology projects fail as it is. There's no reason unless you need heavy budget, heavy buy, and heavy authority to try to guarantee an outcome without a little R&D. And so a lot of our projects started under the covers without really asking for permission until we could prove something. And it's something I take into my startup today is pitch
Yes.
decks are great, and
Hmm.
your vaporware, your Figmas, your prototypes that don't actually do
Hmm.
anything, those are great, but they're not actually going to convince somebody what this product's going to be. Being able to touch something, being able to move something, seeing it in its actual place versus just vapor is really important. And so for these technology projects, I routinely wouldn't actually bring them for full approval. I would figure out, because I'd have an R&D budget, I would use that strategically to get something going. And then once there's something you can touch and feel, you can get excited about, then I'll sell the vision of the future because it's showing I've executed this far. Let me do the next eight.
So that's absolutely awesome. And it also, in my mind, thinks that's a lot of work. And I love that about it. It just is. So you're
Mhm.
navigating between department to department to department, not to mention doing real-time experiments,
Mhm.
as you said, under the cover, so to speak. It's just a very cool way to describe that. And in addition to realizing that, what would you say as you left the organization were the best takeaways that you got? That's a biggie. That like
Mhm.
going, knowing that different departments have different needs, and you're not pitching one big mambo pitch deck.
Mhm.
Um, I love that. What else would you say were the best things that you were able to now, like that you're also using with your startups?
Yeah, I definitely think what one of the catchphrases I had when I was at United Talent Agency was my
Yeah.
entire job wasn't to be massively visionary or to be a project manager. It was
Hmm.
to sell, and it was to sell that vision. It was to sell what we could do and what we were doing. And so what I learned from the Clippers and I gleaned from it and I take these days is being able to translate. Don't over technicalize the world
Yep.
is,
Love the
and we
word.
saw that so much with AI.
Yeah.
6 months after GPT 3.5 came out, everything was AI, AI, AI. In
Hmm.
reality, most of us knew it's really not. You're just throwing AI into what used to be ML, or you're throwing data as AI. And then we saw that like really cliff of no, these things aren't working. There is an AI in all this. It was a great sales pitch, but in reality, you needed real use cases. And now over the past year, we've seen a lot more of those legitimate use
Hmm.
cases that really mean something come to pass. And so as we go back to what I learned was being able to translate to the different languages, not love languages as you have in personal life, but work languages maybe of how a CMO wants to hear it, or how a your president wants to understand. Because even though your president might have come from revenues like a
Hmm.
CRO previously, and you can translate some things through there, their overall goal is for the entire org where your CRO is just focused on sales, just focused on revenue, right? And so having those translations is big to me.
So that you're able to, the way that I'm hearing you, that if I'm hearing you correctly, which I actually love this part, which is where you're able to make things more outward facing. And I like
Yes.
that. And so one of the things I remember from being in a corporate business landscape and the television landscape was the sense that there was a lot of silos, right?
Mhm.
And so the IT people, what you just said, one of the things, my best takeaway, like from a sales dynamic, or going into United Talent Agency,
Mhm.
my job was to sell. that was really not happening much in terms of
Mhm.
even say 15 years ago, let alone 10 or 5. But as far back as 15, that just didn't happen.
Yeah.
Tech people did this, sales people did that, the finance people did this, and so your ability to weave as you're telling the story between the boring part of budgets to the really tech-driven parts of innovation to the sales dynamic, not that many people do that. I can understand why they're moving in from there because not that many people are willing to take those risks, which the question then becomes that's that's a lot of risk where you were always a risk driven or that courageous.
So it's interesting because I've been told this many times before of being seen as a big risk taker. The way
Mhm.
that I've actually at least compartmentalized it in my mind is
Yeah.
I have plan A, plan B, plan
Mhm.
C, and similar to like I was saying before, I give as little bits and pieces as I can to be able to still be dynamic enough to shift. So if
Okay.
I'm about to present to the board on a new AI project,
Yep.
but before I'm doing that, I'm going to the CMO and
Mhm.
kind of pitching him how the MarTech and AdTech would play within it. And if I get pushback, I am using that conversation to actively listen of like, how do I need to refactor? Because so often, especially in technology, people come in and whatever their idea is, they are fervent. That has to be it, and marketing has to figure out their own thing, and sales has to figure out their own thing, and legal, who cares about compliance?
Yeah. Who cares
But
about that?
in reality, if I come into that board meeting and have already addressed this with five, six
Mhm.
of the other executives,
Right.
they're now going into their board meetings, or they're coming in as a, and it's just reinforcing that this is the right thing to do. And the more that you have that entire corporate ownership and corporate workmanship
Mhm.
internally, it's not my voice anymore. It's six other voices that are echoing just something that I brought up, just a little bit in piece that then they asked me to push. So I don't see as much as risk taking as it is a combination of layering a lot of different things
Mhm.
and being able to be nimble that if that's not right, actively listen to pivot.
Charles, it might be the opposite. I might have asked that question too fast, right? Then I've got to, you just said plan A, plan B, plan C. And it
Yeah.
also sounds like plan D, plan E, and F and G for the various departments. When you went to United Talent Agency, and now it's like, okay, your job is to sell, right? And so that just feels like an immediate high pressure situation. I based on the ranking, based upon look, watching Entourage. I don't know. The right. It's like,
Mhm.
how did you make the adjustment? And were you afforded the luxury of doing all that sort of testing within departments? You know what I mean? Did they give you that sort of time? Were you able to do it?
I would, so I came into what one interesting thing that most people don't realize about
Mm.
sports teams like
Right.
the Clippers is it might be a $3 billion brand, but
Mhm.
it's only 300 to 400 actual people. So it's more of like a mom and pop shop with a
That's amazing.
massive impact,
Right.
right? So
Right.
now as I
Right.
go to United Talent Agency where there's
Mhm.
2,000
Mhm.
people for a smaller overall valuation, you
Ah.
realize how do you actually now you're going more into enterprise mode, like a traditional enterprise when you're thinking of 10,000 people,
Mhm.
very slow moving things,
Mhm.
but 80% of the entire operation are salespeople. So now you start to, okay, I know how to play this game. I need to really engage into that,
Mhm.
selling the value, selling the vision, selling
Mhm.
the future, getting into how do I be helpful to make you more money? How do I improve your line items? How do I make my team a part of your line items so that you see us as indispensable?
Mhm.
And luckily, the CIO prior to me had done so much of the normal IT level work that it wasn't like we were fixing the servers or firewalls or Wi-Fi like we had to do at the Clippers. We were
Right.
actually truly in build mode. We built
Mhm.
applications, we built service lines, we enabled data across the organization. And so as I got that machine going, then it was Charles is at every single meeting to try to grow that real estate into other people's spaces, not to take over, because it was never that I was the authority over them. It was, how do I get my team embedded? How do I get my team to be seen as, if I have a question, I want to ask them? And that's where the transition into how I got involved in so many of the mergers and acquisitions really helped, because now I knew how the businesses was doing. I knew the different business units, so I could play the game and have the conversation with our strategy team, who's looking at these potential targets and acquisitions, and get pulled in that way. So that was the next transition that came in.
So coming from a background, mine was exclusively like sales and sales management, and just thinking about all of the egos that are involved there. No offense to anybody in the audience that remembers me or anyone in the sales career, but there was a lot of egos and stuff. So you bringing in that sort of sense of being of value, being of service, being the solution rather than being the competitor or the roadblock. Did you bring that idea to UTA, or was that agreed upon? Like, how did you go in? Because I would imagine that with a company that big and bulky, that a lot of people knew what to do, at least, and you would just ask them. You know what I mean? How did you know? You just ask them, and it's like, but you're coming in with a solution that's more value oriented, and I'm guessing much appreciated. But how were you able to find your own space in an organization so heavily layered with so many salespeople?
I would say I try to be the secretly non-tech guy that just happened to have a tech title. And so when I'm talking to them, they go, "Oh, you're not like anybody else that like we've dealt with before. You talk my language." And then getting them excited. And then 6 months later, they go, "Oh, you do have the technical." Like, I've already won them over, because it is, I'm the little secret that don't tell anybody, but like, I got your back. I know what you're going through. I know what you're dealing with, type of thing.
Oh, God love you. No wonder.
Yeah.
I'm already completely sold. Talk to me in regards to the number one thing that I really wanted to hear about today, which is your ability to make things. I'm getting the foundation, the infrastructure for where you go, but I'm also going to ask as well too, that as in a very short amount of time, what feels like literally overnight, at least to me, that you can't get out of a conversation without any conversation without the words AI and or engagement coming up, and somehow you're managing to be at the forefront of both. When things are moving as quickly as they are, and everyone needs to get their hands not only dirty but in, and make it theirs, what would you say have been some of the challenges for you so far in regards to navigating what is this sense of we all need to do it space,
Yeah, I think the hardest part that we've seen in AI is all about the execution. And finding legitimate use cases that are easily solved without having a very deep understanding or background in AI. And so what I've seen, and when I'm working with startups, or I'm being pulled on as a co-founder, what's on the paper tends to totally make sense. That sounds great for this AI to be able to do this, that, and the other. But there are very few people that are architecturally sound to be able to actually make that happen. And what you're seeing is the inverse of, historically, your system architects, your technical architects have 10, 15 years within the space, because they understand how all the different systems work, and they're coming from enterprise application development or anything like that. But now the people who are actually the most valuable for executing might only have 3 years, but they're teaching YouTube channels. They're putting together use cases without even actually having enterprise applications, because they don't know. They're just trying to put something and put their social media out there. But they're actually becoming very adept at being, now I can take, okay, guys, here's my enterprise lens of how I would do that. Here's what is actually possible within AI, and then taking those new voices that and new architects, but blending how do you put stability into it? How do you make it enterprise capable? How do you make it as something that is actually standardized and repeatable, and pulling those two together? And I would say the hardest challenge that I've experienced is in that product level team where they're not technical enough to really understand how to make some of this stuff work, but
Right.
they're not so, but they have a lot of vision.
Mm-hmm.
But blending those two, I would definitely
Mm-hmm.
have seen the difficulties. Once you get a person who thinks the product way, you have an enterprise person who can think how to like scaffold and architect it, and then you have the really deep expertise that only has 3 years, but is really in that innovative spot in their brain, and you can put
Yeah.
those three together.
Mm-hmm.
Boom! All of a sudden, you have
Mm-hmm.
an explosion of we could hit any use case, and we could hit utilizing generative AI to
Mm-hmm.
do grant applications, or like now you're starting to blend both like the old world of solving a problem in
Mm-hmm.
a new way to solve it.
So you had taken, I'm taking one step back
Yeah.
intentionally, or at least I hope it is intentionally, but I'm going to say that what was it like? Like, what helped you or forced you or whatever it was to make the leap, even though I said from two major organizations, even though you call, and I fully understand when you talk about calling like, the Clippers a mom and pop shop, like, I get what you mean. I get it.
Yeah.
And then leaving this massive organization, what was it? What caused you to then make this transition, and why, and what was the adjustment like?
It's a really good question. I
Mm,
think the last year that I was with UTA was the year of the two strikes. And so there's a
okay.
lot of constraints on the overall budget. There was
Right.
a lot of stress. And one of the things I like to say about sports organizations that also is very much the same with sales organizations.
Hmm.
When you won last night, today's conference calls are going to be super easy. When you lost last night, today's calls are going to suck. And in the same way, when you're selling, when revenue's up, when everything's going well,
Hmm.
everything seems to be easy, and you can glean off of that to have more R&D, to have more fun and play with things and figure
Yeah.
things out. But as that becomes more
Hmm.
constrained, and you shift a group from what was the innovator, enabler, empowering function within the organization to back to more of a support, because we just have to limit overall, that becomes a constraint on what my personality does the best
Yeah.
at. But then the second piece was as I got deeper with the M&A group and the ventures group
Yeah.
within UT,
Yeah.
I was seeing all of these startups that were very interesting and didn't have a perfect pitch, but they were being successful. They were making their
Hmm.
own rules. They were starting to figure out that space. And so I had after I presented at our AI Circo and leading a couple panels, I had this entrepreneur come up to me and say, "I would like to take you out to dinner."
Hmm.
And after 2 or 3 hours at the steakhouse, he basically gave me that hard talk of, you're at a crossroads in your life. You've done amazing things, but you're never going to get that joy you had when hearing that one startup pitch. You're never going to be able to be as innovative unless you are actually the one driving the innovation versus just selling it to non-innovative executives. And so that shift is what I made the decision. Okay, I need to fully go into this and build my entire brand from gleaning the goodness that I have from the Clippers, from management consulting, and from
Hmm.
UTA, to how do I create the next $1 trillion startup with 3 people? How do I dive into, well, I truly feel that AI is shifting the ability to change so many pieces of the world,
Hmm.
but not in a dystopian way, having the vision, take my architecture expertise into driving those startups to be something, utilizing the business capabilities to go not just 1 to 100, but like actually have a viable startup that's gone through everything for compliance and diligence that can get to that next round.
Charles, during that steak dinner, I am this envisioning now. Did your friends see it in your face? Did you express it? Was it the wine? What was it that where it was like, okay, I'll tell you. I almost could feel that when you were saying that, when you know it's time to go. What was it that I'll ask it better. What gave you the guts to say, yeah, you're right?
The way that he phrased it felt like a roast almost. So, and it was
Okay.
a just one hit pot shot after another pot shot after another pot shot. This is what's going to happen if you stick around with. So it was like this really like breaking me down. And then it was, what are you scared of? You've had massive success. You could go back to anything you ever wanted to, even in 2 or 3 years after being out of it. You could go back to whatever you wanted to. Hell, and he's a very very wealthy, has 2 exits. So he even gave if you wanted to come work for me, I would give you something. But stop kidding yourself. This is what you need to be doing. This is your passion. I can see it in your face, even as I'm making fun of you right now.
Right.
You are giving me the clues that this has to be what you want to do.
It's crazy to me. I find those people, whoever that person is, never saw them, never met them, have no. Those people are spectacular because they know when their timing, like it's crazy when people have that kind of vision and they're literally pulling it. And as you said, describing it as a roast where you're just taking shot after shot after shot after shot, and you're like, okay, I give. So you give. Give me the beginning process of when you are now. He's talking about the excitement of, all of this, and there's 3 people. Walk me through a little bit of the goods and the bads as you are breaking into your own domain at this point with AI, it's not like everybody was all excited that AI's coming. So, you know what I mean? So what's it like in your own new frontier?
Yeah. So
the friendly AI guy.
the friendly AI guy, the empathetic AI guy.
There you go.
I would say it was extremely overwhelming at the beginning. So I left UTA, I think in February, and as I had already started doing some events, but I went from working 60 or so hours at an enterprise job to 10 or so events a week, speaking at conferences, speaking in front of founders, taking my old way of like, this is how I build a brand, to this is the only way for me to jump in. And this was the dawn of the AI in LA. And LA has blown up for all the ventures that are within AI, deep tech, et cetera. And so I became so overwhelmed, started to branch off and do almost too many things, advising. And like, because my whole goal was, I had my startup, I had Investment, which was your AI platform to be able to, if you have an idea or a concept for a product, you can work with it, and it's using generative AI to help you flesh out into a business plan, a market analysis, financial analysis, a product roadmap, how much it's going to cost, and eventually an actual pre-revenue estimate of what it is. So I was focused on that, but then I started getting into more and more of these advisory opportunities and more of these investors or family offices, but they were all from my like historical backlog. So people that I had talked to in the past 2 years, or I knew from the Clippers or ex NBA players and things like that. And so that first
Your comfort zone.
Yeah, my comfort zone. And but that first 5 months became, oh my gosh, this is so many things. There's so many ways I can help. And I started to figure out the best place for me when I'm in advising is either right around that deal ideation and deal creation of where's the value in this, give it to them, and then let them run with it. Or it's within the doctoring of initial stage startups. So that what I was doing with Investment, it was very similar, where I'd have a founder who doesn't really have a technical background, has a really good idea, has a dev team in place, and has some of these pieces, but doesn't know how to pitch it, doesn't know how to give it the gravitas. And so that's where a lot of my honing came, where I had the things that I had started myself, but then I would start being the hired technical gun for everything else. And that I think that first 6 months was overwhelming, but really valuable. Similar to my management experience, where it was like so many different things going on at once. I had very many different experiences, so many events. And now, as we shift into being a very specific hired gun while my startups are going, now I have a portfolio. Now I have something. I have a team underneath me. I have both my branding team with what we're doing in our podcast and production, as well as my capital team that works with the family offices, and then my investment team. And as all 3 of those I've learned I have to have a GM at each of them, because it can't can't just be me. I have to be able to be the ideation, the operational, saying this is how it's going to go, and then handing it off.
Did your foundation with other major organizations help you or make the process of delegation easier for you, or did it make it harder? Because I know a number of brilliant minds and successful business people that have a really hard time coming to that conclusion, as you said, that I must have a GM at each and everything. Was that difficult? And how'd you get past it if it was?
It's a great question. And I think at the heart of what I'm really good at is not IT or technology or AI or any of those domain expertise. It's all around systematization and process management. I'm really good at architecting processes that are repeatable, easily taught, and composable, to not having to be an expert, to be, as long as you're given the checklist all the way down to what you need to do. Similar to at the Clippers, our game day, we had game day staff, which are basically interns that have zero IT technology experience at all. But I built the entire system and productized how they set up the cables, set up the camera, set up what's in the locker rooms, so that every single time that they're getting into something, I have no reason to really be there. Where the first few months, it was like I was the guy who was creative and solving everything on the spot. That works at the beginning. It doesn't work in the long run. And I learned that in the Clippers, as well as what we put together at UTA. And so as we go into these other ventures, it's the same thing of there's never going to be another Charles. So I can't have a Lieutenant Charles and expect that, because it's hard to find those. And it's not because I'm amazing. It's just, it's hard to find another version of yourself that's not more important or more valuable, or like that is making more than you are. And so how do I standardize each of those for the GM? I lean into my special sauce, and everything that's outside of it, let's make that a systematized process.
Wow. I honestly, God, when I launched my own company, I remember, and when I started to do like live streams and stuff like that, I can still remember working with a tech person, and it's funny. He said, because I was almost rolling my eyes when he had said, and I had no reason or right to, but was rolling my eyes because he was talking about a checklist. And he's like, John, I do this for me. Every single day, I stick a checklist on my desk or whatever, on my, you know what I mean, on my whiteboard. And he said, I do that for me. He said, it has nothing to do with questioning your ability. It has everything to do with dumbing this down to the point where you can focus on what you're actually supposed to be focusing on. And if I tell you the number of times early on where I literally have said, yeah, I have to ask people to remind me to turn record on, and that it's like, well, that's sadly based on real life experiences. And that's something small. But when it is foundations for your business or scaling, which is like when you're trying to make a business grow, I love the idea that you're able to systematize, that you're able to create these sorts of checklists.
Well, and I mean, so I'm also a private pilot in my personal time, and in aviation, everything is about checklists. And it's funny because I think one of the things that I brought from the enterprise world into this smaller world is almost these parts of the process where they might not be relevant to today, but you have them in there for growth. And one of the examples I like to talk about when I'm flying is there's the checklist to do startup, to get the plane ready to go to run up. And one of them is to brief the passengers and to tell them this is what we're doing in case of an emergency. You do X, Y, and Z. But most of the time it's me and one other person, or it's me and another pilot, but still going through that, knowing that when we go on a 737, they absolutely do that. You have the safety video, you have these things. And so like that enterprise think of bringing it down, and it might be an abbreviated version, but I still go through that part of the checklist. And the reason why those checklists are so helpful is not when your mind is fully able to think about, oh, let me creatively solve this. It's the engine is down. first go X, Y, and Z before you even start to think about what you would instinctively do to pull up or correct certain things. This is the best way. You go power, you go to the restart. Like going through those processes is really important when your mind has to be so focused, laser focused, and then allows you to be creative on top of that. And that's where I think systems allow creativity to blossom, and unadulterated creativity kills the ability for systems to be repeatable over and over. So as somebody who hates myself to be in a checklist all the time, I have to hold myself to it. Otherwise, it doesn't allow me to be creative in the most expanded way.
Oh my God. All right. So I absolutely love that. So now I'll face it outward one more time in regards to the sense of helping business owners. You used an example earlier, and I loved it, and I'm paraphrasing, where the sense that you have these different sets of talent, and you've got people that may not have the foundation, but they have, like, they might have only been doing it for a couple of years, so they have the ability to, with the YouTube content and being proficient at things, and people with pieces of information. So rather than ask you what's the best information to have, because I think that's an unanswerable question, maybe for business owners where a lot of businesses are a few people, and you've got the innovations and still some inherent fear as to what AI means, or is it going to steal my identity or give away all my clients, like from what have you. What would be, whether it's a checklist or a foundation, that you would suggest with business owners to better take advantage of the tech, leaving room to grow with all of that as well too, as opposed to needing to memorize this so it all changes by 5 p.m.? What would you say would be the foundational thing that would matter for businesses?
Well, so it's a interesting concept of, with technology and AI moving so quickly now.
Yeah.
I try to be cognizant and try to tell others it's really important not to learn every bit of the specifics. It's important to learn how the tools and what tools are out there. And so
Okay.
the product hunter mindset is something that I talk to a lot of executives, where you want to be knowledgeable at what products are out there. If you have a problem, go on Product Hunt, go on Medium, just look to see if there's anything out there. Not because you're going to use it. Know that that's a valid problem that other people have, and now start to get ideas of how to fix it. And so as AI comes into place, use that as your toolkit. So if it's Chat GPT, you don't have to be a prompt master. Google the prompts for product ideation ideas, for business plan ideas, or whatever, and use templates. Use what has already been. Don't reinvent the wheel just to reinvent the wheel. When we talk about the business startup checklist, there's thousands out there. There's nothing special that you have to know. You don't have to have an MBA. You don't have to live in San Francisco to know how to start a business. There's 1,000 things out there, and none of them are going to be perfect, but they're all going to be at 90%, that they're going to be more than enough to take that off of your mind. And that's where I say, use what's out there in the world that's already proven versus always trying to recreate.
So I'll ask you from a creative standpoint. I love when you say the fact that you've got to be so airtight with the systems that's where real creativity comes from. So I'll ask you from both sides. What would be a couple of tools that you think are really strong? Forgive me, I started the question the wrong way. So what I'm going to ask you instead is, from the foundational side, what would be some, like, Google Medium, as you said, in terms of, like, what are some systems that, from a foundation side, a business owner doesn't have to be a few people, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be a startup, a business that's either trying to reinvent themselves or keep up, and not get lost in the crowd. From the foundation side, what would be a couple of systems that you would suggest exploring first?
So I would say some of the best, at least systematized things, are like the frameworks that are out there. So they're for technical organizations. There's a company called Infotech that has built their entire, here's like your periodic table of every piece of your business. And
Okay,
here's the
right.
playbooks to implement those and to get your policies in place for cyber, to get your product team going, blah, 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 blah. And that's a great example of a way to think of your business as a set of playbooks to execute on. And then the special sauce is the one thing that it's not going to have a playbook, but all those playbooks are going to allow you to actually execute that special sauce itself. And for you to be a valuable business is to productize your own playbook, have a proprietary playbook of how you go about things. And if you're always in this mindset of productization,
Right.
we always say the most valuable companies are product companies, not service companies. It's so much harder to scale a consulting company that's reliant on people to hire more people to be able to give these products away and sell and sell and sell, versus a product company that more or less scales infinitely outside of some consumables and consumption, that scales infinitely without the additional need of people in the same way. And so even if you're a service business, how do you productize your services that become more scalable? Going back to, you have a playbook of how you execute. Even if you're a martech agency who implements and gives people the like, here's your marketing vision and marketing strategy for the next year. Well, that should be something that's repeatable. You shouldn't give a new thing every single time. You shouldn't be creatively thinking up. It almost reduces the authenticity if every pitch that you give or every strategy you give, it's a little bit different. And that goes back to, if you compose it into, all right, here's the best strategy for 80% of everybody. Now we tailor that to you. Now we create this special sauce. That's really, really impactful. And then as AI gets layered on top of it, it's going to be using those frameworks to do the 80%, and then using the AI to give you even more, like to empower your creativity even more. So using ChatGPT to give you 5 new ideas of social outreach topics, or 5 ideas for places that you should find your next B2B customer and your sales. And then you creatively, it's not going to give you a perfect thing. It's going to give you a basis that then you creatively sit on top of it.
Charles, I got to tell you, man, and I do want to ask you about from the creative side as well, but just so I don't lose my train of thought, simply that I never heard anyone explain until you and now the fact of how to make a services industry product oriented, which I literally was like, oh, it's a challenge I've gone through. And that's where, like, for a selfish purpose, I'm like, oh. And then I want to ask you, the question then becomes, you had said it's not really authentic, or as authentic as it can be, if you're literally creating something out of thin air each and every time you solve a problem. To you, I'm always curious, what is authenticity to you? How is it best manifested?
To me, authenticity comes from transparency and being able to show one's work. And so when I'm thinking of the pitch, so say somebody is selling me consulting services or they're building a new app and they're telling me how much it's going to cost.
Right.
Well, so often that entire scope of work is going to have a lot of fuzziness in it, a lot of buffer, because they've been burned before and they know how terrible customers can be, and they're always preparing for the worst case scenario. But the hard part is now when say I'm the client and I'm asking, okay, why is this much? And you can't actually break it down into exactly why it is. You lose authenticity, especially I am a terrible client for technical services because I tend to know what they're trying to pitch. And so salespeople don't really know how to explain and be authentic about this is why. And it's why when I'm talking to a lot of B2B SaaS, is your salespeople need to understand what the hell they're talking about. Because if they don't, and they get a question and they say, oh, let me get back to you, you've now lost that authenticity. And it's so easy to just not care because there's 8 other products on the market. You have to be able to understand your value. So as you have that transparency for the authenticity, it's a project plan that actually means something and it's repeatable. So if you come to me 6 months later and you're asking our organization for the scope of work of the same thing, it better be 99% of what it was before, not because you're copying it, because you actually believe in that. Right? That has been thought about. It is, we have done this 20 times this specific app is this plus this plus this plus this. Here's our contingency. And why do we have that contingency? Well, we have that contingency because you're talking about something that it hasn't really been thought through before. And we can either spend a bunch of time in discovery right now before you even start the project, or we can have that contingency to be layered out across it.
Everything becomes more believable. My God, that's a beautiful thing. And I think of like a lot of time, I could take what you just said as a lot of time wasted on my part in regards to the way that I used to do things and the fluff, as you called it, in regards to the sales process. I got it, I get it, and I could go back and then continue to beat myself up for all the fluff that was there, or I could actually use the information. One more question for the moment. Just for the moment, which is simply this, which is if say you are strong foundationally, like you've got it like a business where you've got the model and even some layers and a fair amount of people, but you want to make a more engaging presence rather than the systems and the processes and things like that. What sort of AI tools would you suggest that they could layer into an established business, say, that would enable them to become more creative?
Ooh, well, a lot of the creative tools, whether it's your Canvas, your Adobes, or even like your the Figmas now, where you're able to take structured ways of, we need a PRD, we need a brainstorming session, we need a postmortem or whatnot. But now you're using these tools that have generative so that you can use structure to say, this is what we're going to talk about in the postmortem. But now we want to generate 5 things that we didn't think about. What didn't we cover? And the antithesis, the antithesis prompts are actually really interesting in a lot of your, whether it's the Claudes, the Chat GPTs, et cetera, where it's here's what I'm thinking, what am I missing? Here's what we've come up with. Help me think through other ideas that I might not have considered. Here's our pitch. It didn't work. Tear it apart and why? Or why do I think it didn't work? Is that does that logically sound to what we had actually pitched? And so those antithesis prompts are really interesting because it's not that they're giving you the answers, they're giving you more things and more nuggets to then expand creatively on how to go about. So as a organization that's really foundationally sound, don't use that as that's your guarantee. That's your foundation, that now you need the special butter, and now you need those things that are creating, but create within a structured space. So that I love the Canvas, I love the Lucids, I love all of those ideation type of platforms that still come from some foundational practice that you needed.
Charles, you used the term, was it Figma? I'm embarrassed. But say it for me again so I get it.
So Figma is a platform that a lot of product designers use. It's where you do prototyping and all that, but it also has what historically it was just to build prototypes of products. So think about this is the UI UX, but now it has something called FigJam, which is your infinite whiteboard that has generative components. So you could be like, here's the 5 ideas that we have in a mind map, generate 5 more. Here's the problems that we have, or the customer objectives. What are we missing? And that's where those pieces within generative become really valuable.
So I love every single bit of this. And I meant what I said. So first off, simply because I feel like I got a billion more questions to ask you, because that's one of the fun parts of speaking to somebody that's got such a great combo mind like you, which is systems, processes, and creativity, and they all seem to intersect. I love that sense in terms of creativity and the ability to be able to be at a legitimate, you say your expertise lies at the intersection of technology and business. I'd also have to add, although I don't know that makes it an intersection when I add a third thing, but I was going to say that's tough, but more in regards to, and human nature and the human dynamic and the humanness of it, which to me is really, really impressive. Charles, what's the best way to find you? I've gone, like I said, you've got your website that is launching. What is the best way to reach you? for people?
We have Hurricane CTO. So on Twitter, we're Hurricane CTO, Instagram, Hurricane CTO, LinkedIn / Charles Sims, and the Next Pivot, nextpivot.io is our new podcast that's launching.
That's I'm excited for the podcast too, which
Yeah.
is well too. Like I said, this is terribly fun. Charles, this is genius, and I'm really excited. You certainly served more than the purpose. You're authentic. Again, just the ability to be able to demonstrate, show your work. That's the part that I'll remember. Nothing else. I'll remember all of it. And I feel like for folks, if you've watched and listened to this episode, I know for me personally, I need to watch this and listen more than once because there was so much there. Charles Sims, thank you so much, man, for making time for me today. I really, really appreciate this.
Thank you, John. And just the conversation has definitely made me a lifetime subscriber. I'm excited to hear how the other conversations that you've had, because you have such an engaging way to extract like what the passion is for somebody. So I've had a blast. I didn't even realize we've already gone almost an hour. So yeah.
Exactly. And that's like I said, and could have gone a lot more. So then the last question for the moment is this: would you come back?
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to have you guys on Next Pivot.
I'd be honored. Charles Sims, again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Folks, you've just heard another episode of Your Message Received. Keep watching, listening, liking, sharing. Tell your mom, all that stuff. And we'll keep driving the content through your front door. John Duffin with Duffin Media. We will be back with another episode of Your Message Received very, very soon. Have a great day, all. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.